You ever get that feeling the world's just accelerating? Like you blink and suddenly everything feels different, unpredictable.
Oh, definitely. It's like navigating constant change. Some people call it a global phase transition, right?
Yeah, exactly that. And it's interesting you say that because today we're digging into Sergei Kirilov's Lenses of the Future almanac.
Ah, the almanac from what, 2016, 2017? It feels like ages ago in some ways.
It does.
Mhm.
And you might think, okay, why look back almost a decade? But honestly, that's where some really insightful perspectives are. Perspectives on trends that are absolutely shaping things right now.
Right. Because you have to remember the context. This was before the full impact of the 2020s really hit, before digital algorithms were quite so deeply woven into, well, everything.
Hmm.
And these essays, they were already tackling some pretty fundamental questions, philosophical, ethical, technological stuff.
And connecting things you wouldn't necessarily link,
Yeah.
like urbanization and human biases.
Exactly. It gives you this kind of stereoscopic view. You see how things looked back then.
And it helps make sense of today.
Yeah.
Gives it depth.
Totally. It's like opening this little time capsule of ideas. Some of the titles alone are intriguing, aren't they?
Oh, yeah. Like why catastrophes happen, or the Lenin-Trump effect, or if tomorrow was war. Makes you want to know more.
Definitely.
Okay, so let's unpack some of this. Maybe start with those big unexpected events, catastrophes. Essay number one.
Right. Why catastrophes happen. This one introduces the ideas of pink flamingos and gray swans, which is quite an interesting distinction.
Okay, so not just black swans, the totally unexpected stuff Taleb talks about.
Yeah.
What's a gray swan versus a pink flamingo?
Well, a black swan is the truly unforeseen, yeah. A gray swan, though, is a major risk we can sort of anticipate. We know it's possible, likely even, but the timing is uncertain.
Oh, okay.
But a pink flamingo, that's the one we really should see coming. It's a predictable risk, but for whatever reason, we actively, maybe subconsciously, choose to ignore it.
Okay. The risks we know are there, but just don't deal with.
Yeah.
Like sticking your head in the sand.
Pretty much. And the essay argues that many big tragedies weren't complete surprises. Think about 9/11 maybe, or the Boeing MH17 disaster.
Right. There were warnings, known issues.
Exactly. Intelligence chatter, known vulnerabilities, things that just weren't acted upon effectively for all sorts of reasons.
So if we often know about these things, these pink flamingos, why don't we act? Is it just us psychologically, or is it bigger systems?
Well, the essay points to both, really. Cognitive biases play a huge role, those mental shortcuts our brains take. They can lead us astray. And then you've got institutional interests. Sometimes short-term gains or, political expediency get prioritized over long-term safety.
So the key message is basically pay attention to the known threats. Don't ignore the obvious dangers.
That's the core of it, yeah. Spotting the pink flamingos is step one, a crucial step maybe, in preventing them from blowing up into real catastrophes.
Okay. So less about total surprise, more about a kind of, yeah, willful blindness sometimes. Okay, let's switch gears a bit. How does change actually happen, especially like political or social shifts? Essay 2 talks about the Lenin-Trump effect. That's a memorable title.
It is, isn't it? The core idea there is how opposition movements can gain traction, can even succeed, with surprisingly little initial support.
How little are we talking?
Well, the essay references computer modeling suggesting that a really committed minority, maybe only like 3 to 5% of the population.
Wow, 3 to 5%. That feels tiny.
It does. But the theory is that this small, dedicated group can be enough to trigger a much larger shift.
What makes that tiny percentage so powerful?
A few things seem key, according to the model. First, fragmentation. The opposition doesn't have to be perfectly united at the start.
Okay.
Then, reaching a kind of tipping point, maybe around 10% support, which the essay calls renormalization. That seems to create a snowball effect.
So once it hits 10%, others feel safer joining in.
Kind of, yeah. The fear of being isolated maybe lessens. And crucially, the geographical distribution of that initial committed minority matters. Where they are is important.
So it's not just numbers, it's dedication and location.
And strategy, yeah. And of course, the essay cautions it's not some magic formula. The type of commitment, the message itself, how vulnerable the existing system is, that all plays a role.
And it uses Lenin and Trump as examples. That's quite a pairing.
It is. But the point isn't about ideology, it's about the dynamic. Both started with relatively small, very passionate and strategically located support bases,
Right?
which they then managed to build on to gain wider influence.
Fascinating. A different way to think about how movements can catch fire. Okay, moving to, well, a more serious topic.
Yeah.
Conflict. Essay 3, If Tomorrow War. The title just hangs there, doesn't it?
It does. It sets a certain tone. This essay looks at how military thinking is evolving, moving away from, let's say, traditional warfare ideas.
Towards what?
Towards seeing conflict as an interaction within really complex systems. And a key idea here is Nassim Taleb's concept of anti-fragility.
Anti-fragility.
Yeah.
We've touched on that before. It's not just resilience, not just bouncing back.
No, it's more than that. It's about systems that actually gain from disorder, that get stronger when subjected to stress or shocks.
So applying that to the military, how did that work?
Well, the essay suggests developing strategies that don't just withstand disruptions, but actively learn, adapt, and maybe even gain an advantage because of them. It also mentions methodologies from places like NACSI, the New England Complex Systems Institute, and the U.S. Navy's Strategic Studies Group.
Right, groups using complex systems thinking for planning.
Exactly. Looking at how all the different parts interact over the long term, focusing on, foresight, anti-fragility, resilience, robustness, and spotting fragility.
It sounds much more fluid, adaptive than traditional military doctrine might seem. The essay also mentions asymmetric warfare using cognitive weapons. What's that about?
That's about stratagems that target an opponent's mind, basically. Their beliefs, perceptions, how they make decisions. It's not primarily about physical force.
Like information warfare, propaganda.
Yeah, things like info ops, psych ops, using narratives to undermine morale or create confusion, sow division, targeting the cognitive space.
So the battlefield is increasingly in our heads.
In many ways, yes. Or at least that's becoming an equally critical front.
Okay. Now, following that thread, the almanac seems pretty blunt about the chances of major conflict. Essay 9 is titled, Big War is Inevitable. That's stark.
It is stark, and in that essay, Taleb directly takes aim at the long peace theory.
The idea that the world's just gotten more peaceful since World War II.
Exactly. He argues, based on his mathematical analysis, that a huge war, potentially with, tens of millions of casualties, isn't just possible, it's statistically inevitable, and maybe not that far off.
Wow. That's sobering is an understatement. What's the logic? Why inevitable?
He connects it to historical patterns, these big global phase transitions, periods of massive upheaval, and also potential singularity events, whether they're tech-driven, conflict-driven, or some mix. The basic idea is that huge disruptions like that are just inherent features of complex systems when you look over long enough timescales.
So the relatively peaceful decades we've seen are maybe just a temporary lull, not a permanent shift in this view.
That's the argument, yeah. But then the almanac offers a counterpoint, doesn't it? Essay 16 is what if there is no war?
Right. Bit more optimistic, perhaps.
It explores that scenario, yeah. A future where we manage to avoid that kind of global catastrophe. And it introduces something called the Wake Up 2050 Index.
Wake Up 2050, what does that measure?
It's framed as a way to gauge a country's capacity for long-term thinking, its overall resilience. It looks at things like demographics, investment in R&D and education, how globalized it is, its ability to handle shocks.
And the essay links this to populism, right?
It does. It argues that populism, which often focuses on immediate problems and, let's be honest, shorter-term solutions, tends to drag down a country's score on this long-term resilience index. It mentions using indicators like Ray Dalio's populism index.
Which tracks things like protectionism.
Yeah, protectionism, nationalism, that sort of thing. And contrasts it with Bill Emmett's anti-populism index, which looks for signs of actual long-term strategic thinking, something often missing in populist movements.
And it makes a comparison involving Russia.
Yeah, interestingly, it suggests that based on these kinds of parameters back then, Russia's long-term resilience profile might look more like Turkey's than, say, Switzerland's.
So avoiding big conflicts might hinge on nations adopting more far-sighted, less populist approaches, moving beyond the immediate.
That seems to be the implication, a shift towards longer-term strategic thinking as potentially crucial for stability. Makes sense, doesn't it?
It does. Okay, let's pivot now to the business world. Essay 5 had a pretty dramatic headline. Technological mammoths will die out in 10 years. Since these are from 2016-17, that decade is, well, it's now. How'd that prediction fare?
Yeah, the timeline is definitely relevant. This essay was based on a forecast by Mark Roskin at Gartner. He saw this massive digital transformation coming and predicted a major clash between what he called digitally native companies, the Googles, the Amazons, born digital, and the older, more traditional companies that were, struggling to adapt. Think about how online retail just disrupted everything for traditional stores. That's the kind of dynamic.
So a battle between the digital natives and the incumbents.
Mm.
And the prediction was extinction for the slow movers.
Pretty much.
Yeah.
Roskin talked about a new equilibrium emerging, which the essay calls technolibrium.
Technolibrium.
And yeah, the forecast was that companies unable to fundamentally change their models to really embrace digital would likely disappear within that decade.
So did all the old giants die out?
Well, not all of them, obviously, but we've certainly seen massive disruption, haven't we? Huge shifts in market leadership, traditional players struggling or having to radically reinvent themselves. So, while maybe not a total extinction event, the spirit of the prediction, the scale of the digital disruption, feels pretty accurate.
Yeah, the business landscape feels constantly churned up by tech. Okay, something more abstract now. Wealth distribution. Essay 6 asks, can the distribution of wealth in the world be predicted? Can it?
Well, this essay puts forward a really fascinating idea. It suggests there might be some kind of underlying universal mathematical law that governs how hierarchies form in complex systems, including wealth distribution.
A mathematical law, like physics for money.
Sort of. It draws an analogy to the mathematics of fractals.
Fractals, those repeating patterns you see in nature, like snowflakes or coastlines.
Exactly. The idea is maybe the way wealth concentrates, the patterns of inequality, follow similar mathematical principles across different scales of the economy.
Huh. So if we understood the math behind past distributions,
we might be able to build models that give us some insight into future shifts in wealth inequality. It's speculative, of course, but it hints at a possible underlying order in what seems like a chaotic economic system.
definitely food for thought. Okay, let's get a bit more personal. Essay 7. Want to lose weight? Adjust your surrounding reality. What's that about? Sounds intriguing.
This one dives into research on social networks, specifically how our connections influence our perceptions, particularly around weight.
Okay. How?
The research suggested that people actively trying to lose weight tend, maybe unconsciously, to interact more with people who are heavier than them.
Really?
Yeah. And conversely, people who've successfully lost weight tend to interact more with thinner individuals.
We're sort of recalibrating our own perception based on who we hang out with.
That's the interpretation presented, a kind of unconscious reality correction based on our social environment. And what's really interesting is the essay notes this effect might go beyond weight. It might apply to how we assess our own intelligence, for example. Our social bubble subtly shapes our self-image.
It's like that saying, you're the average of the 5 people you spend the most time with, but maybe with some data behind it.
Something like that, yeah. It highlights the power of our immediate social context.
Okay, let's talk about a different kind of social context, social media. Essay 12 is blunt. And yet, Facebook is harmful? With the asterisk, of course. That's a strong claim for 2017.
It is. This essay discusses research, I think, led by Professor Christakis, looking at Facebook activity and self-reported health.
And what did they find?
They found a correlation. More engagement on the platform, likes, clicks, status updates, seem to be linked to a negative impact on how people felt about their own physical and mental well-being.
So it's not just wasting time. The actual interaction might be detrimental.
That's what the study suggested. They compared objective Facebook usage data with surveys about people's real-life social connections and health. And the finding was that the negative hit to self-assessed health from Facebook activity seemed to outweigh the positive boost people got from their real-world interactions.
Wow. So a net negative.
That was the conclusion presented. Specifically, likes and clicks were correlated with lower overall health self-assessment, and writing status updates was linked to lower mental health self-assessment.
And it challenged older ideas.
Yeah, it cast doubt on some earlier findings that had suggested just having more friends online was linked to better health once they factored in the offline social context properly.
That's quite a finding, especially given how central these platforms are now. Okay, let's shift to our own minds. Essay 23, Intellectual Blindness. What are we talking about here?
This ties into cognitive biases, specifically one called motivated reasoning.
Motivated reasoning sounds like reasoning with an agenda.
Essentially, yeah. It's our tendency to process information in a way that confirms what we already believe, rather than objectively seeking the truth. We hunt for confirming evidence and dismiss contradictory stuff.
We see what we want to see. Why do we do that?
The essay suggests evolutionary roots. Strong emotions, like fear or tribal loyalty, can make us resistant to changing our core beliefs. It protects our worldview, our group identity. The essay uses this analogy. We often think like lawyers, building a case for a conclusion we've already decided on, rather than like scientists testing hypotheses neutrally.
That makes sense.
And it highlights research suggesting that what looks like scientific illiteracy often isn't just a lack of facts, but this kind of stubbornness driven by motivated reasoning. People know the facts sometimes, but dismiss them because they clash with their identity or beliefs.
You see that play out all the time, don't you? In debates about climate change, vaccines, politics. People dig in.
Absolutely. People gravitate to sources confirming their bias, dismiss credible info that doesn't fit.
Did the essay suggest ways around this? Like how to measure opinion more accurately?
It did. It mentions research by someone named Paseka who developed an alternative way to gauge public opinion. He argued traditional polls don't capture this motivated reasoning effect well.
So what did Paseka do differently?
He tried to identify different mental states, actual knowledge, being open to learning, simple ignorance, or actively holding an incorrect understanding due to bias. He used paired questions.
Paired questions, like...
Like instead of just asking, do you believe in evolution? He might also ask, do you think most scientists agree on evolution? Comparing the answers helps distinguish someone who genuinely rejects the science from someone who's maybe just unaware of the consensus.
Ah, that's clever. More nuance.
Yeah, and his findings using this method for evolution acceptance apparently show a much higher percentage holding the scientific view compared to standard Gallup polls once you filter out the motivated reasoning aspect.
Interesting. Okay, so our own minds can be tricky. What about how ideas spread between minds? Essay 22 talks about the new model of power over minds. What's new about it?
This essay looks at how a networked minority, even a small one, can influence the majority through something called information cascades.
Information cascades.
Yeah.
Like ideas going viral?
Sort of, yeah. But the key here is the role of digital profiles and personalized content. Algorithms can target individuals with specific alternative ideas.
Right, micro-targeting.
Exactly. Introducing alternative viewpoints, maybe even misinformation or fake news, very subtly, shaping choices in everything from what we buy to who we vote for.
So it's not just mass media anymore, it's this tailored, networked influence.
Precisely. And the essay highlights the importance of the timing, the delay between getting info from your close circle versus getting it from, say, mainstream news. That gap can be exploited to make certain ideas spread faster, seem more prevalent.
This sounds like it connects back to that Lenin-Trump effect idea, doesn't it?
It does, absolutely. A networked minority using these information dynamics to shift the wider conversation. And the essay makes the point. This isn't just a tool for opposition groups. Establishment powers can use it too.
Understanding these flows of information seems critical then. Okay, let's get concrete again. Elections. Essay 17 makes a bold claim. The formula for victory in elections is open. Really? A formula?
Well, maybe not a magic formula you just plug numbers into, but it discusses research by Hungarian scholars who found strong correlations between election results and things like urbanization levels and population diversity.
Urbanization and diversity. How do they connect to votes?
They used ideas from complexity theory and scaling. Their formula suggests that the degree of tolerance and diversity within big urban areas is a pretty strong predictor of voting patterns.
So more diverse cities tend to vote one way, less diverse areas another?
That's the finding they presented, yeah. They validated it with data from U.S. elections, Brexit, other places. It points to this link between what they call civilizational progress, meaning more multiculturalism, openness, and voting outcomes. The essay frames the core conflict in many modern democracies as this tension between modernism, often flourishing in diverse cities, and traditionalism, which might hold stronger sway elsewhere.
That provides a fascinating lens on political geography, which leads us nicely to Essay 18, which has the rather provocative title, It's Time to Divide. Yikes.
Yeah, that one doesn't pull punches. It builds on the previous idea, exploring the growing social and cultural split apparently linked to this urbanization diversity dynamic.
A split into what?
It talks about the potential formation of two increasingly polarized communities. One is called the Society of Modernity, described as tolerant, open, innovative.
Okay, and the other?
The Society of Archaism, characterized as more traditional, maybe isolationist, favoring simpler solutions.
So not just political disagreement, but almost two diverging cultures within the same country.
That's the worry expressed in the essay. It even floats two possible outcomes.
Yeah.
One is a catastrophic big war fueled by these irreconcilable differences, or a sort of gradual separation, maybe not formal secession, but into largely independent communities with very different values.
That's pretty extreme view of polarization.
It is, and it's elaborated on in Essay 20, just titled People. That one really digs into the data suggesting diversity in cities is growing faster than urbanization itself.
Meaning the gap is widening.
Yeah, leading to this increasing polarization between people in those diverse urban centers and people in, the rest of the country, differences in values, tolerance, openness, even how future-oriented they are.
And this shows up in voting patterns.
Definitely. It points to the trend we see in many places. Larger, more diverse cities leaning progressive, smaller, less diverse areas leaning traditionalist. It uses the U.S. Democrats and Republicans as a prime example of this geographic and cultural sorting.
It really paints a picture of a widening chasm, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Driven by these deep demographic and social shifts. Well, this has been quite a journey through the lenses of the Future Almanac. A lot to chew on.
It really has. And what's incredible is how relevant these essays from, almost 10 years ago feel today, maybe even more relevant.
Yeah. Like what specifically?
Well, that social polarization we just talked about, the pervasive influence of social media, its effects on well-being and information, even the early thoughts on AI risks and complex systems and conflict, it was all being discussed then, and it's only intensified now.
Okay. So for everyone listening, what's the big takeaway here?
I think it highlights these powerful, often kind of hidden forces shaping our world. That tension between tradition and modernity, how information flows and gets manipulated, our own biases getting in the way. Being aware of these dynamics feels pretty crucial for just navigating what's happening now and thinking about what might come next.
And this deep dive, it's really just scratching the surface, isn't it? There's more in that almanac.
Oh, loads more. But maybe the key thought to leave with is how looking back, even just a decade, can give us surprisingly useful lenses. Tools to better understand the challenges and maybe the possibilities that are right in front of us now.